Let's spend about half of that time on continuing wrapping up the modern structure and picture relative to commerce and vessels floating on the Sea of Commerce. And then we'll go to a finale of things. Okay, so 1933, a year that has gone down in the history of infamy. Yeah. Yeah, well, the interesting thing is 1932, 1933, just coincidentally, all kinds of things are falling into place. You know, there's a period of about 6 to 12 months where all of these things start happening. 1932, 33, as you said, Hitler takes control of Germany, basically. He has the Reichstag fire, which is their false flag 911 type event. The Reichstag is their parliament building. And suddenly one night it starts burning, and so he takes upon himself basically emergency war powers. And FDR does the same thing, but this is the United States, so it's the friendlier, nicer version, you know, because then the United States starts healing itself. Everybody goes on work program and builds the Hoover Dam and all kinds of other things, and but systematically putting all this in place. So during 1933 through 35, all kinds of acts are put into place. As I said, the Securities Acts, the Banking Acts, these are now the reorganization of the the debtor in possession. The IRS starts becoming more prominent. There's different revisions of the IRS code. All of them are called reorganization, the reorganization of 1950. So the IRS code is actually, you know, if you're in Chapter 11 in reorganization or Chapter 13 as an individual, you have to put in a reorganization plan. Isn't that interesting that the IRS code revisions are called reorganization plans? Because the IRS code is the ongoing maintenance of the organization of the debtor in possession. So everything now is brought in under the master corporation of the United States as the debtor in possession and made as corporate subdivisions. Simultaneously, the federal government, the federal entity, adopts the Uniform Commercial Code. And then during the course of the next 30 or so years, coming out of Metro is those uniform acts that I talked about, amongst which, or chief of which, is the Uniform Commercial Code. So all 50 states adopted the Uniform Commercial Code between 1933 and 1965. Of course, as we know, there were 48 states in 1933, and the 2 were added to get that complement of the 50 that I talked about esoterically yesterday. So by 1965, well, before I say that, the other thing that is key to all of this is in 1934-35, the federal government and then all 50 states adopted or passed what are called Administrative Procedures Acts. Because the Administrative Procedures is the framework by which the administration of the bankruptcy will proceed. And what it did is it moved everything that had the appearance, because it wasn't constitutional at that point anyways, because of what happened in the 1860s and 70s, but it had the appearance of constitutional structure. At this point, they moved everything under the executive, under the administrative procedures, and made the executive, the governors and the president, as CEOs of corporations administering under the rules of reorganization, which is bankruptcy, which is in admiralty law, the ongoing administration of the debtor in possession. which means that in the states and in the federal, the executive, legislative, and judiciary having the appearance of separation of bodies and powers were really all under the executive administrator. Okay, that's why they call each presidency an administration, you know, because he is administering the ongoing maintenance of the bankruptcy. That means the judicial system is nothing more than a system of administration. It is not judicial in actual fact. And in actual fact, every court is a corporation, and it is held by corporate owners. In many cases, the judges are actually the owners of the corporation. So they're just in commerce. So what it really boils down to is if you don't understand commerce, you don't know what is being acted upon you, and you are completely lost. And that's true with most people. So there's very basic fundamentals, and I'm just going to outline the basics because it's a large subject, but it's a continuing subject of education that as you progress, if you choose to take this path of becoming educated, what you want to be is a master in commerce. You want to be a creditor in commerce, because when you're a creditor, you have standing. When you're a debtor, you don't have standing. And so that when you go into an administrative court, if you're a debtor, you have no standing. That means when you're represented by that foreign agent, that bar attorney, you are actually officially recognized as being an imbecile and being incompetent. Okay?
So if you have a mortgage, you are a debtor.
Well, yes, for sure. Now, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It has to do with the fact that another requirement for a legal contract is equal consideration, right?
Yes, and that's
so
true.
If they give you phony money for your real property, it's an illegal contract, right?
Well, yeah, and it goes deeper than that. Yeah, it goes deeper than that, but we are not going to go into that now because that's too much of a subject.
The point is, though, that there's no justice per se.
Right, it's just settlement. It's settlement of accounts. Okay, but what I am going to address is you ask about a mortgage. I'll use this nice, clean yellow pad. Mort. Gage. This means dead, and this means pledge or oath. So a mortgage in French means a pledge of death. Okay, you bind yourself to something that's dead. Now that's an interesting concept that it took me in learning about commerce for the last 10 years, a long time to actually complete and understand. So I'm going to give you the benefit of 10 years of digesting all of this in the next couple of minutes. It's very simple. When the baby is born, see, remember, we're in admiralty now, in bankruptcy and so forth. Let me back up a second. Remember, the captain of the ship is the authority under the authority of the admiral. He is bringing a ship on the sea into port. What is port? Port is a doorway. Okay, it's an entry point. You have a passport because you walk through a door from one jurisdiction to the other. So when you bring that ship into port, you have cargo. Okay, that cargo is bonded in insurance. Insurance is an admiralty maritime contract. So the captain has the absolute admiralty authority. The cargo is bonded by maritime insurance. He has to deliver it to port. If there is an accident or something happens in transit, like the shit explodes, if they didn't if they didn't store high enough, and the ship blew up. The word shit comes from storing the manure for the fuel in transit. Store high in transit. That's where the word comes from. But something happens, you know. They hit rough seas, cargo is damaged. Well, there's something called a bill of lading that holds contractually the cargo as it was delivered in the original port. So the bill of lading checks in the cargo, it goes into the vessel, it goes on the sea, and it enters the port on the other side. If there's damage, the captain delivers to the port master the bill of lading and a declaration of damage to the cargo. When that happens, the port master arrests the ship. The word arrest is an admiralty term. Okay, so he arrests the ship, which means he seizes control over it. Properly, you know, not adversarially. He simply, in admiralty terms, arrests the ship. Because he must hold that ship in his authority and jurisdiction and not allow it to come onto the land until the insurance adjuster comes and adjusts for the damage and settles it. So once it's settled, he can release the ship and the adjustment is accomplished and the cargo can come on land and the value relative to the damage is settled and it's done. So when that vessel hits port, what does it do? It comes into the dock and it berths, right? These are Admiralty maritime terms. What happens when the berthing vessel, the mother, goes to the hospital under Admiralty jurisdiction, under emergency rules, under the administrative procedures of the executive in control of the collateral chattel property that's going to be bonded and bound by the collateral insurance scheme called Social Securities to underwrite the debt monetization of the collateral property. The mother is the birthing vessel who comes to birth, and the baby, which is new collateral being brought into reality, is received by who? By the dock. So who is bonded and licensed under all of this schematic that I've been outlining. So the dock receives the collateral birthed by the vessel, delivers it to the Secretary of, or the Bureau of Vital Statistics of the state, which is a corporation that has been pledged since the 1930s into this whole scheme as a subdivision corporation, to continue to deliver collateral for the bonding surety of the perpetuation of the debt monetization system. That then is certified under a birth certificate that creates a security instrument to attach to the collateral. How do you like that? And that security instrument is delivered into the trust structure. There's something in this whole schematic called the Depository Trust Corporation, which
What is that at? Where is that at?
Washington, D.C. and New York City.
The one in New York is called the Tower of Power.
The town.
Yeah. And there's the DTC and there's the DTCC, the Depository Trust Seeding, CEDIN. To seed something is to pass ownership over. So everything that is created under the Securities Acts of the 1930s bonds and binds as a collateral and creates a negotiable piece of paper that's going to be capitalized and held by the true owner, which is the Depository Trust Corporation. So anything that is created as a certificate, a equity share, a debt bond, or a registration instrument and so forth, has value in the sea of commerce. And so all we are is creating this vast amount of paper with everything we do. From the minute now the baby is born, birthing the vessel, the dock, and bonding it with the birth certificate, the Social Security number. Now it's the case that you can't, unless you absolutely know what you're doing, you can't even take the baby out of the hospital unless you attach a Social Security number to it. Okay? Today when babies are born. So, so they immediately receive it, bond it, bind it into the matrix. Okay, just like in the movie The Matrix, all the real living bodies were contained in those solution pods and were attached with all the wires to feed off of the life force, the energy. Okay, and then everybody operated in a world of fiction or illusion, the hologram. And they're all corporations, which are fictions in law. Okay, they're all illusions, but everybody's operating as if they're real. So, and it gets deeper and deeper. And as Alice said, curiouser and curiouser. And remember, it was the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland who was talking backwards. So,
So the money accumulates on my social security number.
well, there is no money.
Okay, it's just make believe.
Okay, what there is a basic T-bar of debits and credits. And in what's called generally accepted accounting principles, everything is a zero-sum game. Okay, this side has to balance with this side and end up with zero. Where you have a balance sheet of assets and liabilities, it has to end up at zero. Correct?
So she's talking about the trust, the cestic.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, I was
No,
just
well,
wondering-
no.
You're
She's
right. I
she's
mean-
talking about.
You said about accumulation.
Well, yeah, but I don't want to get all into that today
Yeah, that's
because
fine,
it's very deep and complex, and it'll really confuse more than enlighten. So let's not go there today. But in very simple terms, we are pledged as the bonded collateral. Back to that original thing I talked about yesterday, religion, to bond again, to bind again, to this ultimate goal of creating the law of the king and the priest, or the line of the king and the priest, land and law. Here is the line of the priest. The Hudson Bay Company down to Metro, creating uniform commercial code rules that are going to apply to how things in commerce are operated relative to delivery of goods, warehousing of collateral, warehousing of inventory, settlement of accounts, securitization, settlement of obligations and or things like judgments and so forth. So what it really boils down to is that everything in the system is commercial. In fact, by 1966, Congress passed an act called the Federal Tax Lien Registration Act. And on page 3722 of that act, there is a statement which essentially, it may not be verbatim, but essentially says, henceforward, all matters pertaining to taxation and monetary policy shall be under the purview of the Uniform Commercial Code. Why 1966? Because by 1965, two things were accomplished. They took all the silver coin out of circulation, and all 50 states had adopted the UCC. So now there is nothing left. There's only legal tender, and tender is a commercial term. Okay? When you tender a payment or tender something as payment, it's an act in commerce. And in commerce is a very simple formula: offer and acceptance. Then there is variables on the side of acceptance, which has to do with either two other simple things: staying in honor in commerce or going into dishonor. So what we always want to do is be in honor in commerce. For one thing, that's why they use the phrase for the judge, your honor. It puts him in honor, it puts us in dishonor. So we never call the judge your honor. We might call him asshole, or we might call him, hey, schmuck, but we don't want to call him your honor.
Really? Don't they get mad at you?
Well, they may, but that's their problem, not yours. Okay? But see, the court, huh?
Yeah, but then they throw you back in the who's gal. Yeah, sure will.
Yeah. But you have to know what you're doing, and you have to understand these rules. You have to understand when you cross the bar, you know how the court is set up, that there's this little wooden gate. That's the bar. You cross the bar, you've entered into his commercial zone, onto his ship. He's the captain of the ship. But there are rules in commerce, and there are rules in battle, because you are in battle there, of how to comport yourself. And then there are maxims of law. For instance, in the one maxim of law says, he who leaves the field of battle first loses. So when you engage a process in commerce, you never want to leave the field until you conclude your business. So, and that's these are just basics. We don't have time to go into that, but simply stated that, remember I talked about the myth of ISIS claiming Ra or Re's power, Amun-Re or Marduk-Re's power, by capturing his name, because that is who we are. That's our unique signature. It's like when Richard shows the pictures of the orbs. There's a dot of red, which is the unique resonance or unique sound quality tone of the signature, because sound precedes the light. Light is secondary manifestation, because we are pure resonance, pure sound. And we've been tricked into the illusion of light. That's why the light is the processing center. And I'm going to get into that in the last phase of things. But so when we say our name, we are speaking our unique sonic signature. And so that myth of Isis and capturing the power of Amun-Ra or Marduk-Ra was capturing his name. The same thing applies in court. When you go into court, they want you to identify your name. But what they're looking at on their piece of paper is an all capital letter name, which is the straw man that's been created as a type of a trust in their system that I've been describing. So if you'll notice, if you look on any legal document, a notice from the IRS, a traffic ticket, a tax bill, a utility bill, anything, your name is always in capital letters. Now there's something in the United States government called the Government Style Manual. You can order it from the government printing office. And it tells you precisely the rules of language and English grammar that will be followed in any and all documents issued by the government under administrative rules of everything I just described. You will only find one place in there that describes the use of an all capital letters name. It's the name of a vessel. It's the name of a ship. Okay, USS Enterprise or the USS Lollipop.
Why are the ships usually, if they give them a proper name, they're always women? That's true.
Because it's a birthing vessel.
Birthing.
Mm-hmm. So when the straw man is created, it's an alter ego. It's a fiction in commerce attached to the birth certificate that's going to be bonded and insured by the Social Security construction, which is the insurance underwriting the commercial paper, which are debt obligations called Federal Reserve notes. And and it is a vessel in commerce, a vessel that the foreign agents, the bar attorneys, under letters of marque can board to capture under letters of marque and reprisal that I described earlier, to capture the booty, rape and pillage and take what they want. So everything is pledged collateral. That's why the medical pharmaceutical industries, which represent now about 1/6 of the U.S. economy, and they require a conformity to the actuarial tables that say how many of these collateral chattel vessels must die at any given stage along the way. So there is required a standardization of death and dying. And that's what the FDA and the AMA and APA and the ADA, all these agencies are required to do, maintain the death industry. Yeah, that's why it's all about death, a pledge of death. Because when they create that alter ego, that vessel in commerce, the straw man, all capital letters name, it is actually considered, remember, all of that is in the civil body, the civitas. Okay, and the surety is granted limited privileges, civil rights, right? But the entity, the civil entity, is actually, upon delivery, declared dead. Okay, it's civilly dead.
It goes back to the Sestike Act, 1666, which
Right.
said if you didn't claim it back within 7 years,
Right,
it was deemed as lost at sea.
right,
You had to claim your name,
right.
otherwise it was lost at sea.
So, yeah, what he's talking about is something called a Sestike V trust. Okay, this comes from the French. Sestike, it is you that is the trust, and V is the life. Okay, so you're pledging the life into a Sestike trust, and it goes back to an act that was passed, interestingly, same year that they burned down London and rebuilt it as the City of London.
While it was going on. Really? Yes.
So what it was is at the time you had sailors and soldiers going off to war and sailing across those unknown oceans who might not come back for many years. A lot of them didn't come back at all. But see, they had estates, so they had to have a way to settle the estate. So they passed the Sestike V Act, which said that if somebody didn't come back after 7 years, they could settle the estate. Because some of these people held land under what's called a life estate. Well, if it's not known whether that man is living or dead, his family could hold that estate for a long, long time. So they said, okay, after 7 years, he can be declared dead. Okay, so the straw man is what's called a Sestike trust. Okay, if you look in law under the definition of Sestike is a trust that establishes that the title is vested in another, well, let me rephrase that. The beneficiary of a Sestike trust has limited beneficial use of the corpus of the trust, title of which is vested in another. Okay, now what does that mean? It means when the straw man is created, it's a Sestike trust. An estate is established, and the entity is civilly dead. Okay, this is what's meant by the movies, the Night of the Living Dead. We're all attached to these Sestike trusts, bonded surety, straw man accounts, and we're all in the land of the dead. Okay, we've been taken out of life and put into the land of the dead. We're all the walking dead. Okay? So, the Sestike trust establishes a corpus. You know, in trust you have basically a triangle. You have the grantor, you have the trustee, and you have the beneficiary. The grantor grants something into the trust. The trustee holds it under fiduciary capacity for the benefit of the beneficiary. So all of our straw man accounts are a Sestike trust with the beneficiary having limited beneficial use of the corpus. So we're working our entire life creating the wealth, all of which goes partially into the trust, and often most of it is basically sucked up through the monetary construction, in which taxation, interest, and inflation takes all the wealth out of the system, and we're just on hamster wheels. But we have limited beneficial use. We get to live in the houses that belong to the royal estate. And if we don't keep producing, then we're kicked out. You know, but now we're in this contracting economy because there's no credit left. They've sucked it all dry. There's nothing left to remonetize. So, you know, they're claiming the corpus of all these trusts. And they're all being bought up by corporations and foreign entities and all the rest of it, so that we will be completely dispossessed of any capacity in this land. Okay, unless we do something different. So we as the beneficiary have no power. We cannot do anything, change anything. So then when they arrest the vessel, they bring it into court and it's going to be settled. You know, an account is created. New public funds are created by creating more debt obligations, and this gets into how taxation works and monetary structure. We won't get into that. But suffice to say, what I quoted, henceforward all matters of, you could have just asked me, I would have done it. Taxation and monetary policy are under the purview of the Uniform Commercial Code. So it's all under the Commercial Code. So, did you have a question? Okay. So let's return to that for a second. Honor and dishonor. When we are, so everything in this system is commercial in nature and is an offer to contract. Those contracts create new public funds. It expands the public fund system by creating new monetized debt and creating more current to circulate. And when we have to go into court, of course, and we're as the capacitors that have been short-circuited, as we talked about yesterday, we bring our energetic charge that they will get us to discharge, okay, which is simply a debit and credit. They create a charge on one side, it has to be settled on the other, okay? When you're a debtor, you're over here, you have nothing, you're a beneficiary, you have no power, they're on this side. But we can turn it around and become the creditor.
And they get very, very confused when we do.
Yeah, because they're as ignorant.
Yes.
They're as ignorant, like I said earlier, you know, that whole lower strata, you know, they're as dazed and confused. And, you know, for one thing, because they're used to getting their way, you know, and they ain't getting their way as much anymore, and it's starting to shift. And they're starting to realize that they can't stand behind their bonds of limited liability. For one thing, they're completely bankrupt. There is no, you know, most of their bonds don't even exist, and that's, of course, another story. But let's get back to honor and dishonor. So if I present you with a commercial presentment, which is an offer to contract, you have two choices. You can honor it or dishonor it. You have three ways to honor and 2 ways to dishonor. You can accept it completely. So if I'm a plumber and I give you a bill for $200 because I did work, you accept it and you return it, you pay it, okay? But let's say I'm a plumber and I give you a bill for $25,000 and you say, I want to stay in honor, so I'm going to conditionally accept it subject to your proving your claim, which means you have to come with oral or written testimony and documentation and proof that I owe you $25,000. If I can't prove it under rules of commerce, I can reverse the role. Because if I'm in honor and I send it back to you under a conditional acceptance subject to your proof of claim, you now must either stay in honor or go in dishonor. And if you go in dishonor, I can close the account. And basically settle it without having to pay it.
And the third way?
That is very
The third thing to stay in honor is to refuse it without dishonor because of some material defect. Because if I send you a check as a settlement of a obligation or a contract and it doesn't have a signature, it has a material defect, right? So I can send it back, refuse for cause.
Refuse for cause is the right.
Okay, refuse for cause, the cause being a material defect without dishonor. And in commerce, there's a rule called T plus 72, which means 72 hours. You have 3 days, 72 hours upon receipt or presentment to settle it in one of those three ways. If you don't, you start to go into dishonor. You dishonor by either rejecting it out of hand or remaining silent. So if I send you a $25,000 invoice or a bill and you throw it away because it's ridiculous, I can then continue to follow the rules of commerce and send you a notice of fault and an opportunity to cure your fault. You're in fault and potential dishonor. Okay, and under the rules of commerce, you can do that 2 or 3 times, from a fault to a default to a dishonor, and then close it and create a default judgment against somebody. And this is how we turn things around and use the rules of commerce and turn ourselves into creditors instead of debtors. Because the straw man is the debtor and will always be the debtor. It's a fiction in commerce, and it's on the debit side of the ledger. But we're the surety, we're the bonded surety, but we have the capacity to be the creditor, because it is our credit that creates everything. Because remember, we go back to HJR 192 when I said when they took lawful money out of the system, they had to give us remedy. That remedy was the fact that we were going to continue to underwrite the debtor in possession in the United States by providing our continuing unlimited credit, because we have unlimited credit. And in that system, we are actually supposed to be prepaid, which means we don't have to pay for anything, because they're using our credit to create their monetary system to create all of the wealth. You know, so if a municipality says, okay, we're going to create a bond to build a bridge or a school, they have to take their statistical numbers, how many people are living collateral credit providers are in the municipality to settle the bond. Gets kind of heady, doesn't it?
Not really.
A couple more words there is we're taking control of the store man as the authorized representative.
Right.
In Commons.
Right.
Would this work without deficit spending?
Don't even go there today. All of that is illusory anyways, and you know, but see, they're creating the debt, the deficits, all the rest of it based on going back to the 14th Amendment, that when they're operating in their system that we've agreed to, unless we timely and properly object to it, then the 14th Amendment says that they can continue to create debt.
And we could have unlimited credit to fund that debt.
Right, well, yeah, basically. But again, there's more to it than that, so we don't want to go there today. So, but the basic is that this is our ability to remove ourselves from the attachment to this lunacy, which is what it is literally. Remember, money is a lunar cult.
Then you go to that. I mean, I don't think we're going to go here, but because we're not actually dealing with money anymore, then we actually can start using instruments to discharge debt, which is a whole
Right.
other area. But
Which is what
it's insane. It's
Yeah.
insane.
And what's really insane is we've been doing this, you know, in one form or another, many of us, over the last 10, 15 years, getting better and better at it, and getting to the point where they are starting to go insane. Okay, because they're not, it's not going the way it's supposed to in their automatonic pre-programmed system. And at the same time, people who are very skilled and qualified are removing judges from the benches. They're applying and executing on liens, taking judges' pensions, all kinds of things. And not just judges, police officers, courts, police departments, etc. But you know, it's coming to a critical mass. Let's just say that. And basically the bottom line is the jig is up. They've been found out. They can only operate in the darkness of of their hidden agenda. That hidden agenda has been virtually totally exposed. And it's only a matter of time before it implodes and collapses on itself.
Any minute now,
Anytime,
Miss
really,
Barbara.
yeah.
Yeah.
I-
24 hours?
It's happening as we speak.
Right, I mean, I just would like to let you know, I read the paper yesterday and today about Obama negotiating our national, budget crisis. So there's a whole newspaper article in the LA Times yesterday, today, and the AV press. I mean, you can read it. There's in dire straits repeatedly. And they, so I'm just asking you, how long
Yeah.
will this take? Because repeatedly, I'm thinking now while you speak,
You
is
talk-
it collapsing any moment?
Yeah, no, it's happening right
You're
now.
talking about fiction.
Yeah, and that's also it too. That anything in the news is completely. It's under Air. It's under Air Goebbels' Ministry of Propaganda.
Did you say Air Global or?
Air Goebbels. HERRGOEBBELS. Adolf Hitler's Minister of Propaganda, who said, my German pronunciation is not as good as hers, who said that if you say a lie often enough, it becomes accepted as truth. Okay, so remember what I said under Operation Paperclip, all these Nazi scientists and propagandists and so forth, a few token ones were hung at the Nuremberg trials, but most of them escaped to Argentina and otherwise, or were smuggled into U.S. or into Russia, and then they created the Cold War and the nuclear stuff and all the rest of it. But in the meantime, they were all working on the same team and just continued pacing forward. So let's leave.
So when this collapses now, what we are heading for? This is what you said. Sorry, I
No,
just would like to.
I just want to ask a question. So whose debt is it?
Yes.
Take mine.
Yeah, it's not ours. It's the United States and the Federal Reserve. Okay, it's a corporation. So when we severed the tie and the presumption as being the collateral and the surety, at a certain point it will all implode on them. And it's all an illusion anyways, it's all fiction. But they have that. This is the great work of the ages. Remember my flyer says, what is the great work of the ages? The great work of the ages is the secret societies and the cult of Aton and everything we've been talking about for 2 days, to deliver at the end of time, bring those two lines together, to own all the land and all the people and bind them to a perpetual system of law, statutes and codes, private law that we've consented and agreed to. Well, one of the solutions is very simply, remove your consent. Okay? You can do that right now. Anybody interested in doing
Yes,
that?
absolutely.
Join, I want to repopulate the republic.
Yeah, and then repopulate the republic.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we've all been living lives over and over again and being cycled through time loops and reprocessed, as I said, creating this illusion of, the rewards in heaven and all the rest of it. And we keep on binding ourselves by oath and vows and agreements to all of this. So you can start by simply rescinding any and all oaths, vows, agreements that you've ever made through all time and space, except for anything that's currently still in alignment with your true self. For example, if you have a commitment in your marriage and you want to retain that as a binding oath for now, maybe later you don't, but so that's still valid. But if you were a monk in the 12th century, for example, and you took a vow of poverty, energetically that's still attached to you. Okay?
That explains it.
Yeah.
It's still attached.
And there is that spiritual material dialectic of saying, if you're going to be spiritual, you can't have materiality. So become a monk, and you're going to be closer to God by taking a vow of poverty. Well, we'll leave the wealth to them while we're in this pseudo, illusion of heaven and its rewards. So we will become, renunciates. We will renounce all material pleasures, luxuries, etc. Well, if we are eternal beings, then don't you think, and if we create by the resonance of our declaratory sound, starting with saying who we are, that's why they capture your name. In court, when you board their ship and you cross the bar, the first thing they say is they call the name of the defendant, which is the all caps corporate fiction, and they say is Kenneth Cousins here. Now they're looking at their piece of paper that says this is a corporate fiction, a vessel in commerce. And if I say yes I am, then I've just traversed into presumption that I am one and the same as that debtor in commerce.
So how should you respond?
See, I'm here in regards to that matter as the authorized representative.
Wow. Here
Okay.
in regards to that matter as the authorized representative.
Right.
And I'll say, and what
Okay.
is your name?
I did ask him what their name
Well, my mother calls me Ken, and when she's mad at me, she calls me Kenneth. Well, may I have your whole name? No, sir, actually, I would like your name. What is your name? Well, it says right there. Well, I would like you to read that out for me. What is your name? My name is Joe Smith or Judge Smith. I said, I'd like your full name. And you wait until he gives you your full name, and then you say, thank you, I accept that offer. Now, you've just captured his vessel.
And he says, back in the who's gal are you?
Huh?
And then he says, you're back in the who's gal for being a smart ass.
No.
Yeah, I bet you there are judges
He's
that would
getting
try and put you in
frustrated.
I've
contempt.
been
Yeah.
working in this
Yeah.
court in a lot this last year, so I.
Right, I understand.
Do it.
But see, you ran into court and you volunteered to be presumed one and the same as the debtor. Instead of standing as a creditor in commerce who is exempt from levy and prepaid in the system. Exempt from levy means that they have no ability to apply taxation in that reorganization scheme under the IRS reorganization code. Okay, that means you are not taxable.
So how to do that?
Hang on one second. So you study and you learn. Okay. Because there's no money, there's only offers to contract to expand public funds, which are monetized debt. So remember, under the UCC, all matters pertaining to taxation and monetary policy under the Uniform Commercial Code, which is nothing more than offers to contract under acceptance rules or honor and dishonor, as I just described. So what that translates to is when you are given a traffic ticket, a citation, it's an offer to contract. You accept by signing it and not returning it conditioned upon proof of claim within that 3-day or 30-day period or at any time. But you can do that. But say you don't do that, you have accepted a contract to expand public funds. Now, it appears that there's an amount of a fine, $450. That's the tax. But if you're exempt from levy, you don't have to pay that tax. Okay? You can accept that contract and return it for settlement and require them to pay the tax. You can actually require them to pay the tax, the police officer who wrote the contract. Okay, you can revert the taxable income back to him because you're creating new funds by creating, it's all what's called negotiable instruments.
How do you keep
Okay.
your driver's license in the meantime?
I don't have one. What's a negotiable instrument? Under the rules of commerce, it's created by a maker or a payor, a payee, and an endorser. What happens, say, for example, you write a check. You think you have money in your account, right? You don't. When you gave it to the bank, it's their money. You don't have any. But you have a ledger entry that appears as if you have money. So you write a check and you give me a check for $100. I turn it over and I endorse it. Payer, payee, endorser. Now I give it to my bank as my fiduciary to settle the account, which goes through the Federal Reserve System and the DTC and settles it in a debit-credit relationship. Debit, credit, zero sum, the account settled. Okay? So, and it goes on and on. I mean, it takes a lot to learn this stuff, and I'm only, as far as I'm concerned, just really getting a grasp of it over 20 years. But, you know, I'm giving you the distillation and the benefit that you don't have to grind through the last 20 years that I did, and have a foundation. And that's the whole purpose of this, is to have both a practical foundation for understanding this and understand the options and solutions. First and foremost, as far as we're concerned, Jason and Paul and I, is to come into the Republic, because we re-inhabited the Republic last year, you know, which we talk about and so forth. And I think Leo is now in the Republic, right?
Yes, he is.
Yeah. So, because we have reestablished the only authority, reasserted the only authority that has the ability to bring law back to the land and remove this overlay of this sea of commerce and this vessels and admiralty. You know, they went so far as to, remember the Administrative Procedures Act, the highway patrols of each corporate state are under the Revenue Department. Why? Because they cruise the rivers of tar as the ingress of admiralty onto the land. So the federal highway system is considered rivers of tar flowing on the land so that they can ingress, you know. And there's all kinds of court cases of when they allowed admiralty to come inland on the Mississippi River and certain things in the 1800s, you know. And then the Navy sent climbers up to every peak on the continent and put plaques at the top of the peak, and it said high water mark, you know, so that they could say, because at one time, remember I talked about the planet was smaller and then it expanded and then it created the ocean. So, you know, at one time all the land was underwater, you know. So at one time we were, that was the high water mark. Because you can go up to these mountain peaks and you can find, you know, marine shells and stuff like that. So they claim it as, you know, high water mark and say that we're all underwater here, you know, which is of course an absurdity, but if we don't object to it, then.
Do you have to renounce your citizenship to be part of the Republic?
No. But it depends what you define as citizen.
Yes.
Do you want to be a U.S. citizen, or do you want to be an American national, a living woman on the land in the Republic with declaration of sovereign rights and jural capacity? Jural capacity means you have the law. We are the law. If you have the law, then you could constitute your court of record as a sovereign, as I described earlier, under the Magna Carta and all the other stuff that I've been learning and teaching people, how we are the law. And we are
I want to do that too, so I want to be, you know.
Good,
You just
okay.
have to let
Talk to
know.
us afterwards.
Yeah, this is, remember, I'm framing it out. I'm giving the practical basis of how this has all arrived at this point. And I've given you, you know, what's the title of this seminar? How does it all fit together? You know, both sides, the material and the seen and the unseen, the material and the spiritual, the integration of all of it as who and what we really are, okay?
Can I just ask you, you said before that we are supposed to let go of all our contracts, you know, going back maybe being a monk in the 12th century. The only thing I didn't catch is what you said afterwards, how to do that.
Okay, well, let's do it now.
Okay.
Everybody want to do that?
Yes.
Okay, it's a rescission of oaths, vows, and contracts. Okay, so repeat after me.
Precision.
If there's anything I say that's not in alignment with you, don't say it.
All right.
Okay, I hereby
I hereby
revoke and rescind any and all oaths, vows, commitments, energetic ties, contracts, written or oral, that I, as a living being, in my true capacity, have ever taken upon myself, in this life, or any other life, that is not in alignment with me, here and now. They are hereby revoked, rescinded, and canceled ab initio. They are hereby revoked and rescinded ab initio, which means to the beginning, nunc pro tunc, which means as if they never were.
Non-pro-tunc.
Nunc pro tunc.
Non-pro-tunc.
Additionally,
Additionally,
I forgive myself for accepting and allowing any and all illusions, constructs that I have agreed with or bought into that have supported the illusions of all that I have learned this weekend. Okay. What that means is we will get into the last phase of the weekend. Self-forgiveness. Okay? Because we are either a master of our own creation or we are a victim of it, right? Or victim of somebody else's creation. If we see something outside of ourselves as the causative factor that did something to us, our enemy or that which has caused harm or perceived harm to us, that that is to blame for the condition that I am currently in my life, then we put our power and authority outside of ourselves. So if somebody does something to us, we say, okay, I will forgive you. Well, if you forgive them, that means they had the power to create it. Okay? But if you know that you created everything by accepting and allowing vast amounts of constructs by the incremental illusions perpetrated by our friend Mr. Anu, by and through our journey through time, as we, as vast, eternal, multidimensional, unlimited beings of creation, continually compressed ourselves into more and more limited reality based on lack and limitation and perception of separation, or the belief in separation, well then we have no power. If we have no power because something outside of ourselves is to blame, or something did it to us, or something owes us for something, or we need to forgive something or someone, then we can't change it. Okay? So that applies to our friend Anu and Enki and Enlil and Marduk. It applies to the U.S. government. It applies to the Bushes, the Rothschilds, and everybody else. Okay? So for as long as we stay in that mode, we're victims, and therefore we're not at a directive principle of cause of creating our own reality. But if we accept that we did create it, and we forgive ourselves for creating it or accepting and allowing it, then we literally have the capacity of recreation.
So let's roll our sleeves up, fix it right here, and hang around for a while.
Well, yeah. But it's going to take a little bit of time because we have to face all the manifested consequences of everything we've accepted and allowed, including the entire condition of this planet.
So
You know?
let's fix the sinking ship.
Well, yeah. And it's going to take a while.
Make it float again. Let's make it a top cabin.
You have to
starts
forgive
here.
and accept
Yes,
yourself,
yeah.
and then forgive and accept
Right.
everyone.
You know, so that's where my fundamental
So we have to forgive ourselves.
challenge to the Christian construct is, because they believe that there's something outside of them that's going to save them, that you have to contract to this whole construct of God or Yahweh or Jesus or what have you. You know, now that's a different, you know, like I said earlier, that heartfelt passion for something that's pure and whole and good and etc. I mean, I don't, you know, have any problem with that. Many Christians have that. Others use the Christian calling card for their way of lying, cheating, and stealing, and justifying, well, I'm a Christian, so I'm already saved, and I'll go up to heaven with Jesus, so I can do anything I want. You know, it's built into the Catholic Church. You know, I can do anything I want as long as I get absolution on my deathbed, and the priest takes it away from me. You know. And so I can do whatever in service to God and be absolved of my sins at the end. Okay? But who is sin? Remember, that's just another name for the moon goddess.
Right.
You know, it's just a lunacy, the lunar cult of self-delusion, you know.
Right.
So as we saw, you know, the origin of the name Jesus comes from Esu or Essa, and there are many variations, including Zeus and Jesus and Jesus and all the rest of it, going back tens of thousands of years before any of this happened. Of course, they will say, the Christians will say, that's because it was heralding the coming and the advent of, you know. I say, no, turn it around. It's because of that pre-programmed template that continued to be downloaded and prepping it to the end point, which was already determined from the beginning. Okay, but the same applies to the Islam and Hindu and even the Buddhists, because I have a friend. Yep. Because, you know, I have a friend who's really into Buddhism, and I've been a certain kind, I don't even know which kind, but it comes out of Japan, and recently I got it from him. He sends out these weekly things for meditation events he has at his house, and about a month ago he sent this description out that they chant to the such and such Buddha to take their karma away. Well, what's the difference? Sin, karma, it's the same thing.
The sad
Yeah.
thing is that, like many religions, though, when it goes through great distance over great time, it changes. Consider the fact that
Well, of course.
Buddha at first founded the religion on principles of non-materiality, and then by the time it gets to Japan,
Okay, but look at that. Principles of non-materiality. Once again, it's like the fundamental is teaching you to get off the wheel of karma so you can get out of materiality. Okay, that's the same as the renunciate who takes a vow of poverty and leaves the wealth and the abundance that is our inheritance and our birthright to those who would say they own it through this whole system I've just described. Okay, so there's more. Yeah, but who wants to detach from it? This is material and this is my gift of life. So why not embody it fully, ground in? You asked earlier, how do we ground?
Yes.
You just answered it for yourself. You ground by being in your body, not by renouncing it.
Right.
Okay? Because what is the ultimate renunciation of the whole thing we're talking about? The vilifying of the feminine principle, you know, saying that, you know, the horns of the devil or the, you know, the morning star and the evening star that I grafted out, you know, etc. So how do we ground? How do we come into our body? First of all, recognize that we're in a mind consciousness construct that is illusory in nature, that has built this whole fabricated illusion, corporate fiction, the whole thing. Now, we're going to take a break, and then I'm going to give you the second punchline that Barbara has wanted, okay? You all ready for it?
Yes, I am.
Good.
Okay, so let's take a break, and then we'll come back for the last round.